Yes,
Thank you very much for your stimulating papers. I found them both very inspiring. And I have two questions. I start with Helen because it's the shorter question. My question is, what do you mean when you refer to John's cultural memories? Are we here really dealing with cultural memories or rather with social and cultural frames instead of cultural memory? And the other question is more something to think about. I wonder whether the whole eyewitness debate is just another version of can't we find out what really happened? After form criticism has failed, the debate about the reliability of eyewitness memories sometimes seems to have become kind of a new toy for a certain strand of research. And to my perception, the whole debate is beside the point. Just two observations on that. First, the question whether we are dealing with eyewitness memory in the Gospels at all is rarely asked. Sorry, I can't read my own handwriting, and it can't be proved. No one regards the Gospels as transcripts of eyewitness memories, so I wonder why the question of which type of memory is how reliable is so important to that strand of research. And the other point, the question how family memories operates, how experiences and memories are recalled and celebrated by intimate memory groups to construct identity, and what happens when this material is put to page is also rarely discussed, but I think much more important. So my question is, are we not barking up the wrong tree altogether when we concentrate on the eyewitness question?
Yes, of course, my paper was purely devoted to getting the psychology right, because it has been so widely got wrong and quite misleading claims have been made. Of course, I wrote a whole large book about why I think the eyewitness memories are pretty much there in the Gospels as we have them. Why does it matter? Eyewitness testimony is not a kind of some kind of objective record of what happened. I say throughout the book that memory is interpretative. But if, as I think, the Christian claim about Jesus is that it is interpreted history, then it matters that our sources are close enough to the history for us to entertain the plausibility of the interpreted memories that we have in the Gospels.
Thank you. Your question to me was about cultural memory and social memory and what I mean by those terms, wasn't it?
Whether it's just cultural memories or other social frames.
Okay. Both. I think, at least the way I'm understanding it, I'm using cultural memory and social memory fairly interchangeably, and I'm thinking in terms of different frames within that, shared frames of reference, I suppose, shared kind of frameworks within that. But I may well be not specific enough in terms of my use of those at the moment. I mean, I'm still trying to kind of work out where the material is and how some of these things actually help me. But I am also not always helped by the literature itself, which is sometimes slightly sort of fuzzy on exactly how it understands these things.
Over here. Gentleman with the black shirt.
Sorry, thank you both for wonderful papers. I wanted to just say ask a quick question to Helen. I thought it was wonderful, that paper, so much good sense, like drinking clean spring water or something to me. It's very nice. I wanted to ask about I agreed with on almost everything except the structure element. You suggested that Mark's and John's structure are somehow rather different. To me, what you're talking about there is they narrate particular events in different places, but actually there's a very similar structure in each. I mean, the most famous thing that all undergraduate students know about Mark is that it's a passion narrative with an extended introduction. I mean, Kayla actually said that of all three synoptics, but the fun thing is it's actually more true of John than any of the synoptics. He's really got half of the book is the passion narrative, effectively. So in some senses there, I think he's outmarked Mark. So I think all I suppose I'm asking is, could you actually push even further on the similarity of John to Mark, or that Mark inspires John to do something similar but supersede, complete what Mark had done?
Yes, I like the analogy of pure spring water, though perhaps whiskey would have been better. I did have an extra paragraph in that I had to take out. At first I thought I had nothing, and then I had loads of stuff, and was taking things out. At one point I wanted to sort of stress the genre issue more as well, because I think that's really important. And I did have a paragraph in there about how exactly the passion narrative is even more dominant in John, so I completely agree with that. I suppose by structure, maybe I mean the geographical structure. I mean, you could also say that, this idea of having miracles in the first half is also something that you get in John, and that's coming from Mark as well. We don't tend to notice it as much in Mark, but it is coming from Mark. So, yes, I suppose those broader structural things are very similar. I suppose I was just fixing on this idea of the in and out to Jerusalem more, and I could have been more specific on that, the geographical structure, perhaps.
Samuel Bearscourt.
So thank you very much, both of you, for wonderful lectures and clarifying lectures. I had one question for Richard on the psychology of memory, which I appreciate that you make this obvious distinction between the three types of memory. I also think that people should recognize that more clearly, that there are different types of memory in psychology. But my question was on these types of memory, the procedural, the semantic, and the episodic memory. I have the impression sometimes that you read the research as if they think of different, compartments in the brain. So I was curious about how you read the present state of research concerning the interaction between the different types of memory, the procedural, the semantic, and the episodic memory. I had the feeling sometimes that you were inclined to see them as very different things, although there must be interactions between these types of memory in the brain. Could you comment on that?
Yes, I do think procedural memory is really a very different thing. Maybe you're right, but I can't think of how it would. I think the relation between semantic and episodic is interesting, and I do think semantic memory can feed into memory. For example, your brain may place a remembered event in a particular place, and the semantic memory may supply information about that place, which enters into your memory. So there can be, as it were, elements of remembering information and concepts which can influence the way the brain retrieves an event memory. As to how these actually are located in the brain is, of course, incredibly difficult. There is a lot of stuff about that relating to neuroscience and so on, and I don't know the detail of it. But my general impression is that the brain has all sorts of locations for different kinds of memory, so that a remembered personal event memory would be drawing, for example, on different bits of the brain which record the different senses, the sensual perceptions that make up that event. So the brain is it's incredible that it does this, but it does apparently, and the evidence is very good. It does assemble bits of this original encoded memory, reassembles them to create that event. And it may do other things at the same time. And schemas, actually, I mentioned schemas. Schemas, I suppose, are sort of semantic memory. So if you are, as it were, remembering for the first time and you cast your memory in a particular narrative structure, that may come from your semantic memory. Yes.
James. Mic over to you, please.
So it's a question to Richard, but it touches on some of the things that Helen said as well. I'm here. And I appreciate your paper was about answering Dale Ellison in particular about issues of psychology and so on. But I want to talk about the implications of what your work may imply. Because let's assume you're right. I think you've made at least a very general case that we can get reliable eyewitness reports about certain events and so on. I mean, I think that's fairly indisputable in itself. However, we're in a context where this could have happened. I've got no problem with that. But people rewrite things, people are creative, people make things up. We've got Haggadic traditions, and Helen mentioned things like the rewritten Bible and speeches being creatively written. So I wonder, after all this, after all the debate, are we still roughly where we were pre-Bauckham, in that we have to go through case by case, really, to work out whether we're dealing with things that really happened and so on? I mean, what would you say to the argument that what you've done is you've at least shown the possibility that some stuff could be remembered accurately, but actually we're still dealing with the more chaotic problem of how do we sift through the evidence? It's really building on the first question.
Yes, I mean, in a sense this is preliminary, but I think an essential bit of preliminary to thinking about whether we have eyewitness memories at all. I mean, there were reviewers of my book who said, well, what does it matter? You know, even if we have the eyewitness testimony, eyewitnesses can get things wrong. And I think that's very silly. If we've got it from close to the eyewitness, there's a much better chance of it being right. I mean, in other words, eyewitnesses were in a position to know. So, you know, evaluating historical evidence, if you've got something close to the eyewitnesses, you know, normal historical method would say that that's you know, that's more reliable than much later stuff. However, how do we go about actually weighing the historicity of material? And you know, when I say historicity, I mean, of course, interpretive history. You know, but how do we go about weighing the historicity? I mean, my sense is that I think the second quest thing, the criteria of authenticity, all that has completely failed. It's obvious that it's failed. If it had succeeded, everybody would have the same picture of Jesus who uses that method, and it's produced as much variety as we ever have. But of course, you see, that was all dependent on the form critical atomization of the tradition, so that we have to do precisely what you're saying, of, as it were, trying to weigh each individual bit of tradition. And I don't think we can do that. We don't have the resources to do that. It's just not the way we can approach it. So I think what we have to think about is whether sources, you know, a particular source, let us say Mark's Gospel, has features that can give us a general confidence in the reliability of that source. And I don't need to know whether this particular miracle or that particular miracle can be, you know, finally established as what actually happened. I'm entirely happy, and I think a great deal of history is like this. I mean, I'm happy with the general probability that this material is a good source. So I think the whole dynamic of the quest required us to. It got people into thinking that if we don't have a remarkably high level of certainty, then we don't know anything. And that's not true. Most history is about probability.
We go to Anthony. This will have to be our last, I'm afraid.
I really got a lot from both papers, and I want to thank you both for very thoughtful and provocative new ways to think about the gospel tradition. Richard, I love some of what you're doing. And I really do want to emphasize my affection. I think that Dale Allison's book, while also brilliant in my mind, it's a very pessimistic book. That's the framework of it. I think what he's doing is he's saying, lamentably, I built my career on a certain confidence I no longer have. However, let me see where this goes for the next 600 pages. Right? So it's framed in pessimism, but it's a big, long, hefty book about what we might be able to say about the historical Jesus. And I see in that book a tendency that I think you're right to combat, in that we are so fascinated by the failures or the frailty or the problems of memory, that it's really inevitable that we're so fascinated with those things that we emphasize those as we enter into sort of a cross-disciplinary discussion. But I want to take your advice on being clear about the kinds of memory we're talking about. So that was one of the main points of your paper. Let's be clear about the kinds of memory we're talking about. Aleida Osman suggests that it might be helpful to think of memory along an axis, where a cross-section of cultural memory and communicative memory. And it seems like a lot of sociologists are interested in the cultural memory part of the axis. And I see your book as sort of drawing our attention in a way that hadn't been done before, drawing our attention to the communicative part of the axis in a way that's helpful. But I think there's a danger there in then privileging the communicative memory aspect on the basis of eyewitnesses and not properly framing it within the cultural memory part of the axis. And so I'm wondering, in other words, you're focusing on psychology, and that was what the book was about, and that's great. I think a lot of the folks in this room have done a lot of work in sociology of memory. And it seems like we really need both. And I'm wondering if you might be able to talk about how the difference between communicative memory and cultural memory might play upon one another.
Yes, thank you. I obviously should have read the third part of my paper, which I didn't get to, which was called Psychology of Eyewitness Memory, or it's good, I forget, and Social Memory was but it was basically a protest against the absorption of eyewitness memory into social memory, which Albert Axel seems to be did very deliberately. He just said all memory is social memory, so we forget about anything special in individual personal event memories, which I'm talking about. If my paper had a point apart from correcting ideas about the unreliability of memory, the other part of my paper was precisely to plead for serious attention to the psychology of memory on the part of people who are interested in social memory, who tend to neglect it. So I do want us to be doing both, but this is my plea that we should do both, and not just social memory, and not imagine that personal event memory is another sort of social memory. The thing about personal event memory is that they are owned by the rememberer. It's essential to a personal event memory that it's my memory. I was there, I remember it. That's highly significant. I mean, that's a phenomenological thing. It's what marks out these memories in all cultures. I don't think this is Western individualism. I think this is of the nature, the structure of our minds and our brains and our thinking. The personal event memories have a distinctive quality and value for the rememberer, but they also, therefore, have distinctive social functions, because because other people recognise the distinctiveness of that sort of personal memory.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think we need to stop there. Let's thank both Richard and Helen for two very stimulating